Welcome, dear listeners, to my channel, a place where we explore mysterious and uncanny stories from across Asia. I truly hope you'll accompany and support these tales they unfold. Thank you for being here. This is a story passed down through whispers and rumours among locals in China. A tale believed to be highly authentic, with events said to have occurred around the year 1985. Without further delay, let us enter the unsettling story titled Hide and Seek. When I was little and living at my grandmother's house, the heat was unbearable, so I had no choice but to stay with her to escape the sun. By today's standards, that place would be called a slum. From east to west were narrow alleys, barely wide enough for 3 people to pass at once. Each alley housed over a dozen families, and the whole area was filled with low, cramped houses. Of course, my grandmother's house was no different. She had 6 daughters, so the top floor was divided into even smaller spaces to serve as rooms. I still remember my uncle staying up there while preparing for graduation exams. It was damp, stuffy, and smelled of mildew. Even in late autumn, staying there for a short while would leave you drenched in sweat. Most of the houses were self-built. Though old and shabby, they were solid enough. However, the lighting was poor, so poor that even during the day you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. But for the people living there, it was still better than a straw hut or makeshift shack. Each alley had 1 or 2 passages that connected from end to end, forming a large net or like a patch of land covering cracks and gaps. The children from each household, regardless of age, were all raised freely. In spring, they played marbles. In summer, they tossed picture cards. In autumn, they spun tops. In winter, they had snowball fights. The only thing on their minds was finding new ways to play. Back then, wherever you looked, you could see muddy little rascals with sweaty heads running around wildly. Sometimes they'd bump into busy adults. The parents might yell a few words, but most of the time, they didn't have the energy to bother. Of course, this kind of layout was perfect for one particular game, hide and seek. And speaking of hide and seek, I always think of Tiongwin. Tiongwin's family wasn't originally from our area. He and his mother, a thin, pale woman, moved into the house right next to my grandmother's. The family who had lived there before wanted to relocate, so they rented the place out to the mother and son. Tiongwin's mother was extremely peculiar. No matter the season, spring, summer, autumn or winter, she always wore the same outfit. A faded floral blouse and a pair of thin brown slacks. Every day she held a handful of rice in her hand to feed the hens she kept, hens that looked even skinnier than she was, like sticks. She didn't enjoy talking to the neighbours, but she had to rely on weaving small bamboo items to sell in order to support herself and her son, things like brooms, rice sifters or woven hats. Her face always wore a kind of unspeakable sorrow, like someone suffering from an illness they couldn't describe, or like a child constantly waiting to be scolded. Her skin was the colour of dried husks, and her lips had a bluish tint, dry and cracked, which made her appearance deeply unsettling. Every time her son came home, there was always a flash of fear and disgust in her eyes that she couldn't hide, a stark contrast to her gentle, almost doting behaviour. Her voice was always very low, as though muffled by a thin veil or rising from deep underground. In the sweltering summer heat, it sounded like the dying rasp of a cicada. Although she didn't like to join in the neighbourhood bustle, you could often hear her talking to her son. But it was mostly just her voice. Her son rarely seemed to respond. Occasionally, you might catch a few exchanges. During the day, Tiongwin was usually outside playing. Only at night did the two of them sit and talk. There were a few times when I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and heard noises coming from their house. I would sneak over and crouch under their window to listen in. But the conversations were strange. So strange I couldn't really make sense of them. Leave me alone. What more do you want from me? How long are you going to stay with me? Aren't you leaving yet? Words like that, and Tiongwin would always reply with just one word: no. I was extremely curious about that strange mother and son. But back then, adults believed children were too nosy. If I ever mentioned any of it to my grandma or mom, at most they would tap me lightly on the butt and half-jokingly scold me before going back to their own business. Kids at 5 or 6 are nothing but walking question marks, curious about everything. So I started paying attention to Tiongwin. The area where my grandmother lived used to be dense forest. Over 100 years ago, toward the end of the Qing dynasty, a group of fishermen came ashore and decided to settle here. The place came to be called Fung Family Hamlet. As for why it had that name, no one could really say anymore. It was just passed down through generations. There were tons of kids in this neighborhood, from 5 to 9 years old. You could grab a handful just by stretching your arm. Naturally, there was never a shortage of games and running around. Most families were in similar economic situations. Not wealthy, just scraping by. And poor kids naturally looked out for one another. So it didn't take more than a few days before Tiongwin had blended in with all of us, like he'd always been there. That night, I couldn't fall asleep until very late. The usual lullaby-like murmurs of my grandmother and mother were gone from my ears, no longer soothing me or coaxing me into sleep. Only one sentence from Tiongwin kept circling endlessly in my mind: blind them. What a freak, I muttered as I turned over. The heat tonight felt more intense than usual. Normally the night breeze should have been cool and refreshing, but now it was weak, barely there. Suddenly I felt a tightness in my lower body. I had to pee. I crawled off the bamboo bed, rubbing my still slightly sore eyes, and headed out to relieve myself. As I've mentioned before, the alleys of Fung Family Hamlet were extremely narrow. In summer, the houses turned into steam boxes, so everyone laid their bamboo mats and beds outside to avoid the heat. My grandmother's house was at the mouth of the alley. None of the homes had their own toilets. Adults had to walk over 100 meters to use the public restroom. As for us kids, we all just used the open drains nearby. I got down from bed and noticed the moon had already risen. Because the yard was cluttered with stuff, I carefully stepped around piles of household items, and then I noticed the neighbours all sleeping outside. I hadn't paid attention to this before. Maybe because my eyes were sore that day, I instinctively looked more closely. From where I stood stretching down the alley, there were people lying in front of every house. No one moved. They looked like stacked goods, indistinguishable from one another. The silver moonlight shone through the cracks in their old torn plastic coverings and landed on their bare arms and legs, reflecting a strange glow. I had once seen a plastic mannequin factory nearby, a place that made display figures for clothing stores. On that day, they were unloading shipments. The wind was strong, and heaps of naked mannequins lay scattered on the open ground. What I saw now looked exactly like that. I was so young then, I couldn't really tell if what was lying on the ground were real people or not. But after I finished peeing, I suddenly realised that only Tiongwin's household had no one sleeping outside. Ever since they moved in, no matter how hot the weather got, neither he nor his mother ever slept outside. They always went indoors early, right after dinner, and shut the door tight. I was about to go over and take a look, when suddenly the wooden door creaked open. A figure bent over and slipped out through the crack, then straightened up and quietly closed the door behind them. I quickly squatted beside a bamboo rack and took a closer look. It was Tiongwin's mother. Her profile faced toward me, her expression filled with an uncontrollable sense of excitement and relief, like a prisoner just released after serving a sentence, or a gambler awaiting the result of a risky bet. In her hand, she carried a small cloth bag, the same one she and Tiongwin had brought when they moved in. She seemed uneasy and glanced back inside once more. Then she carefully made her way through the alley, stepping over the sleeping bodies. It wasn't easy. She hesitated slightly before choosing to exit via the side alley near where I was hiding. She passed right by me and vanished into the darkness. Luckily, perhaps because she was in such a hurry to leave, she didn't notice me at all. Just as I was still puzzled about why she would sneak out so cautiously at such a late hour, the wooden door, which had just been shut, slowly opened again. Tiongwin stepped outside. His eyes, they weren't small like they appeared during the day. Instead, they gleamed with light, like a cat's eyes. Nguyen had a very large head and his facial features were odd, almost unnaturally flat. From a distance, he looked like a red balloon that had been inflated and then delicately painted with a human face. His skull was oversized and shiny, with only a few strands of wet, slick hair. Underneath his thin, pale scalp, as white as fabric bleached too many times, you could clearly see purple veins as thick as drinking straws. His eyes were tiny, and his sparse eyelashes made it seem like someone had pressed 2 beans into a ball of dough. Still, he liked to squint while speaking. His nose was short and wide, slightly sunken. His lips were thick, always curled upward in a way that made it look like he was perpetually holding back bitterness. Even though Nguyen's mother often went without eating, she always made sure her son had meat and fish every day. They were desperately poor. She would wade barehanded into nearby ponds to catch toads and cook them for him, even if the toxins from their skin left her hands raw and damaged. That's why we were all jealous of him. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was like an adult speaking. He'd lecture all of us kids as if he were our teacher, and somehow we all listened. We actually believed him. His exposed skin was always swollen and semi-translucent, like the thin layer of pigskin peeled off after boiling. His hands were constantly damp. Whenever I held his hand, it felt slippery, like grabbing a bar of soap. Almost every time we played hide and seek, he'd always find us, no matter where we hid. Under carts, inside bamboo baskets, in dark closets, or high up in trees. Every time we thought we'd found the perfect hiding spot, he'd show up soon after. And every time, it was the same. He'd suddenly appear behind you, slap your shoulder hard, then give a cold little laugh and say, "I saw you." Normally, the one who gets caught has to be the next seeker. But Nguyen didn't like hiding, and we were all fine letting him seek, at first. But the game lost its fun when it became too one-sided. Getting caught too often made it dull. So one day, when he excitedly asked us to play again, the other kids just gave him an indifferent look and scattered. Only I stayed. He stood there squinting at the backs of the others walking away, saying nothing. "Why do you always find us?" I asked as we walked home together. "You're all too dumb. Those hiding spots? I've used them 100 times already," he answered bluntly, like always, but I was used to that. "Then, is there a way for the seeker to never find you again?" I asked just as he was about to push open the wooden door to his house. This time, Nguyen didn't answer right away. He paused, pulled his hand back from the door, walked up to me grinning, then raised both his hands and gently placed his thumbs over my eyes. "Blind them," he said softly. "Just like this, press down with your thumbs, then they won't be able to find you anymore." His voice was like a drill, and he actually started pressing. Hard, my vision darkened instantly from the pressure. I was only 5. Of course, I screamed and cried. Nguyen seemed to realize he'd gone too far. He quickly pulled his hands back, turned and walked into his house, leaving me alone outside, rubbing my eyes in pain. "She can't leave. My favorite game is hide and seek." Nguyen's voice was very low, but it sounded like that of a grown man, just like my grandfather's. Right after that, he slipped back into the house. I was a little scared. The heat from earlier had completely vanished. I rubbed at the goosebumps on my arms and climbed back into bed. The next morning, I was woken by my family. Just as I was about to wash my face and get ready for breakfast, I saw Nguyen's mother bringing him a bowl of noodles topped with a fried egg. Nguyen looked very pleased as he received the bowl. I could clearly see steam rising from the noodles, yet he didn't seem bothered by the heat. He slurped them down mouthful after mouthful without even chewing. In the blink of an eye, the bowl was empty. Strangely, his mother didn't seem surprised. She just grabbed the empty bowl with a look of resentment, biting her lip. As for Nguyen, the moment he finished eating, he bolted out the door. Before leaving, he told me to hurry up and eat so we could go play together. Everything that had happened the night before felt completely unreal to me. Maybe it had all just been a dream. That was how I comforted myself at the time. A few more days passed, the summer heat began to fade, and my happy days at my grandmother's house were coming to an end. I counted on my fingers. Tomorrow was the day I had to leave. When Nguyen heard I was going away, he just gave a short "oh," then once again asked everyone to play hide and seek. The other kids only played with him when there was nothing else to do. As always, the result was predictable. Tiungwin spent the whole afternoon catching everyone, without missing a single one. Naturally, I walked home with him while the other kids grumbled in frustration. After dinner, everyone went to bed early. In the middle of the night, the wind suddenly turned cold, like sharp blades cutting into flesh. With my eyes closed, I reached around for a blanket, but couldn't find one. Instead, my hand touched something round, like a ball of meat. When I opened my eyes, I saw Tiungwin crouching beside my bed. My hand was resting on his head. He stared at me, nostrils flaring, his eyes wide open. Of course I screamed in fear, but he quickly covered my mouth with his hand. "Come with me," he said. Then he turned and walked out, and strangely, as if under a spell, I actually followed him. The street, bustling by day, was now silent and deserted. Back then there were no bars, no internet cafes, not even TVs in most homes. They were considered luxury items. At this hour there wasn't a single soul outside, not even a ghost aside from the occasional night watchman. The sound of our footsteps echoed down the asphalt road, still warm from the heat of the day. He walked ahead of me at an even pace. I don't know how long we walked. Eventually we left Fung family hamlet, past the grain station and the state-run shop. "Where exactly are you going?" I couldn't help but ask. "To find someone. She wants to play hide-and-seek with me." He didn't turn around, just kept walking. "Who are you looking for?" I mumbled. This time, Tiungwin didn't answer. He just chuckled lowly ahead of me. His shoulders bounced slightly as he laughed, the flesh at the back of his neck jiggling with the motion. I don't know how much longer we walked, but I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. Until I bumped into him. He had stopped. "You know you can't escape." Tiungwin suddenly spoke. I was still in shock. Then I realized he wasn't talking to me. He was speaking to someone curled up beside a small convenience store that had long since closed for the night. "I'll follow you for the rest of your life," Tiungwin continued. This spot was a junction between the main road and the residential area. No one was around on either side. "I have to try anyway." The person suddenly stood up, carrying a bundle of clothes. It turned out to be Tiungwin's mother. "You're leaving tomorrow, aren't you?" Tiungwin suddenly turned to me with a faint smile. I stood there stunned and nodded. "You're the only one who's ever been truly kind to me." He suddenly reached out a hand, like an elder trying to pat my head. "What are you trying to do now?" the woman suddenly shrieked. Her voice was like fingernails scraping across a chalkboard. Tiungwin's hand froze in midair. For some reason, I instinctively felt he was incredibly dangerous in that moment. I ran over to stand beside the woman. She reached out and pushed me behind her. "I'm sick of this body," Tiungwin murmured, gripping his own head with both hands. "Why do you always play hide-and-seek with me? I already told you, you'll never beat me at it. No matter where you hide, I can always find you." He spread his arms like he was going to trap us and walked toward me. I could clearly feel the woman trembling beside me. "Hide! Go hide, and I'll come find you again. I told you, my favourite thing is to find the ones who hide from me." Tiungwin grinned as he walked forward. "Run! Don't let him find us!" The woman grabbed my hand and we ran down the empty street. I looked back. Tiungwin stood there completely still, one hand reaching out toward us. We ran through several places, but every time, before we could even sit down, Tiungwin would slowly emerge from the shadows. "I found you again! Run! Hide!" Hearing this, the woman screamed like she'd gone mad and pulled me away again. I don't know how long we ran. The woman and I were both exhausted, barely able to move. We collapsed onto the iron railing of a pedestrian path, gasping for air. "Out of breath already?" Tiungwin popped his head through the gap in the railing, grinning blankly. "I'm not running anymore." The woman suddenly found strength from somewhere. She reached out, grabbed Tiungwin by the neck with both hands, and pulled him to the ground. But he just kept smiling. "I only ever sold things. I've never killed anyone, never once. I've put up with you long enough. You're the first!" "The first?" Tiungwin's voice was squeezed into a high, screechy whine, like a leaky faucet ready to shut off. "Blind him and he won't be able to find us." I didn't know why, but suddenly those words came to mind, and before I realized it, I said them out loud. The woman seemed to understand instantly. She pressed her thumbs into Tiun Gwyn's eye sockets. A stream of fresh blood burst from his eyes, splattering across her body. But Tiun Gwyn didn't seem to feel any pain. He just kept smiling, offering no resistance. After a while, he finally collapsed motionless to the ground. The woman, using the last of her strength, dragged me forward, still running, muttering curses under her breath. I turned back. Tiun Gwyn was lying there, completely still. Eventually, both of us could run no more. We collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The woman's voice seemed to return to normal. "I just saved your life, kid," she said proudly, turning to look at me. "Wasn't Tiun Gwyn your son?" I caught my breath, still confused about what kind of relationship they actually had. "He was never my son," she snapped, her face twisted like a demon, fists clenched tight. "I thought he was just a product, something I could sell. I never imagined he'd cling to me like a damn leech," she continued complaining. Then, seeing my blank, clueless expression, she waved her hand in annoyance. "Why am I even telling you this? A dumb little brat like you wouldn't understand." She stood up and stretched her back. "We probably won't see him again. Always going on about hide and seek, that damned little monster. Let's see how he finds me now, with his eyes gone." Then, she narrowed her eyes and stared at me, the way a starving ghost looks at food. I instinctively took 2 steps back. "Come with Auntie. I'll take you out to play." She reached out a hand toward me. I shook my head violently and backed away as she cursed and turned away from me. "Where are you going?" I asked as she turned, her back hunched over as if under great strain. "None of your business," she said, her voice strange as she rolled her neck. "Why does it feel like someone's pulling on my hair?" I suddenly noticed a pale, chubby hand, covered in greenish veins like dried leaf stems emerging from the back of her neck. I looked up. There was another Tiun Gwyn, heavy and grinning grotesquely, riding on her back. One hand gripped her hair, the other was held to his mouth in a shushing gesture. But something felt wrong. There wasn't a single wound on his face. Yet just moments ago, the woman's hands had been soaked in blood. She didn't seem to notice anything. She just walked down the street, a few steps at a time, rolling her neck again. "No matter where you go, I'll always be able to find you." Suddenly, a whisper drifted into my ear. It was Tiun Gwyn's voice. I didn't go home right away. I just sat there until dawn because my legs were too weak to stand. When I finally returned in the morning, I got a scolding. My grandmother and mother were terrified, but thankfully, nothing had happened to me. So in the end, it was just let go. Not long after, I heard that the police had come to the area, holding a wanted poster and looking for Tiun Gwyn's mother, or rather, that woman. "Who was that woman, really?" I asked my mother. "She was a child trafficker," my mother explained angrily. "She specialized in abducting young children around your age, tricking them into gathering together and taking them out to rural areas to sell. But once, the driver dozed off at night and the vehicle flipped into a river. All the children drowned. Their bodies weren't found until days later. When they were pulled out, their heads had swollen like steamed buns with bulging blue veins. A dozen or so kids, all with purplish lips, eyes buried beneath swollen foreheads, their skin soaked until it looked translucent, like pickled radish. That day, the police showed everyone the wanted notice and told the whole story. That's when everyone realized just how evil that woman was. She even had a child of her own, yet she still did something so monstrous. It's a shame they haven't caught her yet." "She wasn't really Tiun Gwyn's mother," I blurted out. My mother looked confused but went on. "Who knows? The police said she had lured another child before she was reported and always kept the kid by her side. Maybe she was planning to raise him as her own. When you've done too many terrible things, maybe you can't even have kids anymore." She cursed under her breath again. Then she hurried off to do her chores. Later, when I visited my grandmother's place, that house had already been taken over by someone else. The woman was never seen again. Now and then, I'd overhear neighbours gossiping. Someone in another town had spotted a frail woman with a big-headed boy, but they were never caught. It was like the two of them were playing hide and seek with the police. After that, I started having the same dream over and over. In it, I saw a group of children playing hide and seek in the distance. They were all laughing and hiding, except for one child who stood with his head resting on his arm against a wall, counting. I happily ran over, wanting to join in. The child against the wall suddenly turned around. He had no eyes, only sunken sockets with dried blood that stretched the eyelids up into deep trench-like folds on his forehead. That face was Tiun Gwyn's. In the dream, I stepped back in terror. The children who had been hiding slowly stepped out from their hiding spots and began walking toward me. They were all Tiun Gwyn, all with the same swollen, oversized heads, squinting eyes, purple-blue lips, wet, bloated bodies. "Come play hide and seek," they all chanted in unison, their voices childlike and innocent. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, and in that moment I finally understood why that woman could never escape Tiun Gwyn.